you?
Good.
Good. I'm Katie Germain. Nice to meet you.
You too.
So before we start our session, I'm going to hand over the informed consent, and I'm going to kind of go over what the informed consent is and what it means. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me during this, and I would be more than happy to explain it to you. So I am a student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in an interviewing skills class. And for my class, we are required to do practice sessions with volunteers. So I'm very thankful for you being my volunteer today, and I'm very appreciative of your time and willingness to work with me. During this practice session, you may choose to talk about a real life concern to yourself, or we can role play a concern. It's kind of whatever you want to talk about today. Because I am a student, I cannot offer any form of legal confidentiality, but because this is a practice session, whatever you say today will be kept in confidence within this room. But basically, there are 3 exceptions to that rule, and that is if I hear you talking about you wanting to harm yourself or harm others, if I hear there's any indication of child neglect or abuse, or if there are any other special conditions. I do need to report it because the state of Illinois, of our state, Illinois, I have to because of Illinois. As you can see, the session will be recorded, so if at any point you feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable, let me know and I will stop the camera. However, this is kind of so I can learn for my interview skills class, and also my supervisor, Dr. Keller, will be seeing this video as well as students in my class, and they will be peer reviewing it and critiquing it, and then I will also be critiquing myself as well. Like I said, I am a student practicing school psychology, so I cannot do any formal counseling, and this is just practice. And then at the end of this session, I will be giving you a form to kind of evaluate how helpful this session was to you and how helpful I was, and if there's anything I need to improve on. So is there anything you don't understand or want me to go over with the informed consent, or do you understand it?
No, I understand it.
You do? Okay. Then if you feel comfortable with this session and everything I said, please sign it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, what brings you here today?
Well, I thought maybe we could chat about a few things, and maybe just talk through some things. One of the things I think I'd like to talk about a little bit is some things when I was younger, some positive things, and some other things that were maybe a little bit more challenging. I recall when I was in kindergarten, I was 5 years old, and I actually had a positive influence. And the reason I bring that up is I think it's important to have positive influences, and the fact that it's just a long time ago. Half a century ago, in fact. And so let me tell you a little bit about that. When I was in kindergarten, I had a teacher. Her name was Mrs. Ost. She was just a lovely woman. I could remember her very vividly. She was so nice to all the students, so nice to me. She always kind of enabled us to be creative, and she just created a fantastic, I think, learning and caring environment in school. I remember the parts in school where she was just, such a nice teacher. And another thing, I had something a little bit more dramatic happen. When I was in kindergarten, I had to go to the hospital and have my tonsils out. So back then, you would go to the hospital and they would keep you there overnight, and they would cut out your tonsils. So I mean, it was, it was kind of a big deal, and it was definitely a big deal for me, as I recall, because that's the hospital, and I'm just a little older than a baby. Really, I was 5 years old, and I can remember the hospital room, and I remember kind of going through this ordeal of being there, and then when I woke up, Mrs. Ost was there. She was in my hospital room, and she had brought me a little game. I'll never forget that. It was such a nice thing, and it was so nice of her to be there outside of school. So that was good, and I remember that a long time ago, obviously. But what a great thing to have someone like that. I guess what I was just wanting to talk about was some positive things that have happened in my life and affected me in different ways, and also some of the challenges I've had growing up, good and bad. We all have experiences, right? And they do different things to people. When I was growing up, I was the youngest of 6 kids. So that presented a unique set of challenges. Our family didn't have a lot of money. We kind of struggled to get along financially, and that was, a unique set of challenges. But also the fact that I was the youngest of 6 kids, I had to deal with siblings that were all older than me, and 3 were brothers and 2 sisters. We're all very close now, so that's a really great thing about having a big family. And it's obviously much different, the experiences I've had, than somebody who is an only child or has had one sibling in their life. But it had a unique set of circumstances. My brothers were kind of tough, and they used to be tough on me. But I always like to think that, although, you struggle with it a little bit because you're a little kid, and growing up, I was getting whippings and beatings and things like that brothers would typically give, and sisters too. My sisters were pretty tough. That was the hard part about it. And at home and in home life, kind of having to work a little bit harder to get my share of stuff, whether it was food. It wasn't this life or death struggle, but, here's one example. I always, my mom, like once a week, would make chicken, and she would make chicken, and I never got the legs, I never got the breast, I never got any of the good pieces of chicken. I always got the chicken wings. And I remembered that strangely, till my adult life, and I wouldn't eat chicken wings. So I carried that with me, but now I can eat chicken wings because they're made differently. It's not fried chicken, mm-hmm. So I know it's a little comical, but that really is true, and it's kind of a weird thing. These things stay with you. I don't know if that really taught me anything, but it was a unique kind of struggle thing. Like I said, my siblings, they kind of kept me tough because we fought a bit and stuff, and when you do that, you learn how to deal with a punishment or a beating from older siblings. They weren't like unbelievably violent or anything like that, but tough enough where and older than me and stronger to where I had to protect myself and learn how to kind of deal with a physical beating. So when I was going through grade school, a couple of times I had to deal with some bullies and, people who were older than me. But I wasn't afraid to. I never was afraid to get hit or roll around and protect myself. It happened a couple of times in in grade school where I had to do that. It was my way of dealing with it, but I think that was kind of a benefit where having those older brothers and sisters, and taking their punishment for so many years, I think I was able to defend myself that particular way. I did it where I would actually fight back in such a way where, good or bad, I probably got in trouble a couple of times where I shouldn't have. Anyway, that's one story about, how maybe a lot of siblings can toughen you up. So that was one. And I do think more about positive influences of growing up a certain way. And I remember when I was in grade school, for most of, I guess it would be from, actually it started in second grade all the way up to eighth grade. I was in wrestling, and very positive influence and mentor in my life, and actually a lot of my friends too who I grew up with, was our wrestling coach, who was also our shop teacher. He seemed like he was always there for us, and he really taught us how to be on time, simple things. But as a kid, you have to learn how to have that discipline, and the discipline for losing weight in wrestling to make your weight class, and how to be tough and learn how to the wrestling moves and do the workouts every day. He was a very positive influence that way. So that's something I certainly remember that was helpful in my life. And I think in general too, sports, and I was also a swimmer in grade school and high school, kind of teaches you persistence, and that was helpful. So I appreciate having coaches and positive teachers like that. I mean, I told you I'd probably talk about a couple of different things, and I mean, on the positive side, those mentoring type things that happen, I think were good for me. So but and that changes, right, as you grow older. I got into my 20s, and one of the things, kind of on the more raw side, was having a larger family. One of the things is, you to kind of get your independence, you always want to go out and get a job and make some money, buy your own clothes and stuff like that. So I definitely started working early. My first job I got when I was in sixth grade. And then pretty much from then on, I always had some sort of job where I was trying to earn some money to do my own thing, really. But being the youngest, we didn't have a lot of resources. That's the bad thing. The good thing is, I think it taught me how to be somewhat resourceful. So when I was in grade school, all my friends had bikes. Their parents would buy them a bike for Christmas, or they'd have a bike. And back then, that's the only way we got around. I mean, we drove bikes for miles and miles and miles every single day. And what I did was, I didn't have a bike. They didn't, my parents didn't buy a bike for me. But I decided I'm going to figure out how to build my own bike. So I got the help of my friend, and I want to say the first one I built I was in second grade, and we just looked all over the place and asked people for different parts, used tools that my family had, and all the wheels didn't match, or the seats didn't match on the first bike I built, but learned how to build a bike, and that was the first of many. And by the time I recall I was in sixth grade, I had built several bikes, and uh, by that time I had, a really cool seat, banana seat I'd put on with these kind of special wheels, and most of this stuff was either picked from the garbage, or I asked people, I'm like, do you need that bike anymore? Or I would take bikes apart and interchange, the parts. Anyway, I could put on different handlebars and things like that. So that was helpful for me. I actually learned how to, by myself, independently, build a bike. So I can get around with the rest of my friends. So in a sense, that was good, having some of that independence. The bad part, my parents weren't around very often. They were always working when I was in grade school, so I didn't see them a lot for sporting events. They couldn't make those. So that was kind of the bad thing. I wish they could have been around more for that stuff. When I was a little bit older, and I'll kind of, talk about high school, and when I was 16, kind of along the same lines, because I was independent. I had to be, because I really didn't live at home anymore after 16. So that was a challenge. So I had to kind of fend for myself again, but it just kind of seemed like the norm for me, and you just get really good at it. Well, I thought I was good at it, I should say. I wasn't that good at it, but I got through it, and it worked for me. But it did teach me to be very independent. I had a very similar situation with cars. So I was working when I was 16, and I'm in high school, of course, but I would go from school to my job. I had to buy a car, and I bought a car. But, I had to keep the car running. So I would do whatever it took, from, replacing brakes, tires, water pumps, radiators, working on carburetors. It was out of necessity. I would just do whatever I had to do to keep the car running. Did I always do it perfectly? No, but you get pretty good at it, and you learn how to do it. So that was kind of how some of that went. Kind of good influences that were positive, and then even some negative things that happen, can affect you in certain ways that could be helpful, but it doesn't always happen exactly how you think it's going to happen.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can give you an example of something that was pretty traumatic that happened, but it kind of changed my outlook and thoughts about certain things.
Sure.
So, in my late 20s, when we had our second child, we had my son, and when he was born, at the time, I was working a pretty high pressure job. I was just trying to get through in business, and trying to overachieve and work really hard to do whatever it took to excel. But it was pretty high pressure, So my wife goes into labor, and it was actually, she had to, it was an emergency. I was in downtown Chicago, and this is 2 or 3 weeks earlier than it's supposed to happen. I get a call, we have to have the baby right now, an emergency C-section, and I'm actually really far away from where that hospital is. So I jump into a cab, and this poor cab driver, he doesn't realize yet, but now he has to go about 50 miles outside out of Chicago. But he was the greatest guy ever. I remember I gave him like all the money I had in my pocket, which wasn't that much. But he was like a dad, and he's like, no, we'll get you there, whatever. So anyway, rushed to the hospital. But it was a very serious situation, and it turned out that my son had some really serious heart issues, and it was a very difficult time. In fact, about 3 months, probably for that period of time, we thought, the worst could really happen, and it was very dire and very serious. And I thought, it was very tough, very trying for the family, and at the same time, I'm going through this work stuff where it's very intense. I'm trying to stay focused and trying to get through that and excel. Very stressful. So after a while, some time goes by, and fortunately, we find the right people to deal with these problems, find the right doctors, the best folks in Chicago, and they figure it out, and it takes time, but after a while we realize, hey, we're out of the woods here. Everything's going to be fine. And so it was a very, very tense time. Now, 20 years later, he's absolutely 100% fine, perfect. That all worked out really, really well. But at the time, after about, maybe, that first 3 months went by, then maybe 5 months, and I really realized, I was like, wait a minute, that all happened, and it was so intense, and it was a very trying time, and after we realized, hey, everything's gonna be okay, I was, back at work, and still working during this time, of course, and stressed out from that. But I had a completely different attitude at work, because I realized, I was stressing and worrying about the wrong things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I put a lot of, I put too much emphasis and stress on things that really weren't that important. And I'm not saying, they weren't important, but the reasons I was getting worried about them and stressed about them weren't valid, weren't justified. And by the way, as you realize that you can work better and harder and smarter by not being stressed out about these things, at work, I think, in business, you'll do much better. I mean, it's just a lot smoother. So I think, a long story about that, but the idea there was, hey, it was a terrible time, but I learned from it, and it made me realize that, there's certain things in life that are way more important, and they'll stress you out enough. You shouldn't stress yourself out about things that aren't quite as important, and they definitely, you shouldn't create the stress yourself when you don't need to. There's enough out there anyway. So that was kind of a work-related story.
Yeah.
Let's see. I talked about some mentors and some positive influences. Also, I didn't really talk about my mom. She was a very positive influence, because primarily she was always very loving and hardworking. And it was never her fault that she had to work all the time. She would work very, very late at night, and I think maybe during grade school and when I was a little kid, maybe she'd get home at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I know that was really tough on her. I was, I definitely in my neighborhood, I was the only kid that had like daycare, because after school, I had to go somewhere. Um, so, I, I can't imagine what it's like for somebody to have that many kids. And there was families in our neighborhood that had 12 kids. I mean, oh my gosh, that's definitely a tribe. I don't know how anybody could do that. I don't know how they.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they could do it nowadays, financially or mentally and physically. It's crazy. I mean, they have those shows on TV, with the people who have 5 or 6 or 8 kids at a time. That seems like it would be very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I mean, I know it was a blessing for us to have as many brothers and sisters as we have, and we're still very close. And my mom always talks about that too, because she loved having all the kids she's had. But with today, how everything, I don't know. I know it would be definitely a challenge to have that many kids. But I think we learned as a bigger family. I did more self-sufficiency and a lot of independence, which is interesting when you think about it, because
Mm-hmm.
you would think you would have less independence with more brothers and sisters. You'd be more dependent, and we weren't. We wanted to kind of separate ourselves from each other. So that was kind of our thing. And, we actually had healthy competition. One, we kind of had to compete for the affections of our mother and father. I think that teaches you probably how to be a little competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we definitely had to compete for food. And so, that could be a little, there could be some physical altercations there.
Yeah.
But it was nothing too crazy. But like I said, I think it taught us independence. It did me anyway. I know I've been pretty independent.
Yeah, it sounds to me like, you were saying when you were younger, your mom did work a lot to provide for your family, and you had a lot of siblings, and that brought you very close together. But you also were able to maintain your independence, and like you were saying earlier in the session, the independence brought you to a positive mindset. It sounds like, because you were able to do things on your own and be resourceful as well.
I would definitely say resourceful. Like they say, was it Benjamin Franklin who said necessity is the mother of invention? We always felt like, my brothers too, like we would invent stuff because we had to. My sister and I, one year, we were just grade schoolers, probably 5th and 6th grade. We decided to raise some money for some charity, and we built a carnival. And we didn't have anything. We didn't buy anything. We just took everything out of the garage, the house, paints, whatever we could find, and we made these, 5 or 6 different little carnival events or carnival stands, and we would charge people, a nickel or something to participate, and we raised, I don't know, $5 or something, but it was an interesting time, and we just we learned how to kind of create with what we had, and you kind of dig around, you scavenge, and like I said, with the bikes, how we used to make those, we would make something out of nothing. And that was kind of neat. I mean, it taught you how to be a little mechanical, a little bit of an engineering thing, and to be imaginative, very imaginative. Oh boy, you should see my Halloween costumes. They were, pretty much made out of whatever we could scrounge together. But some of them came out pretty good. So
Well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it sounds like your childhood, you know, being more independent and even playing with your siblings, you know, kind of created more creativity and finding more resources out there when, you know, maybe your parents couldn't provide all of the resources that you necessarily wanted. Yeah, it sounds like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would say that's very true.
Well, unfortunately, our time in this session is coming to an end. Is there anything else you would like to touch base on before the session ends or talk about, or?
No, I think I've covered a few things for now.
Okay. Well, I look forward to hearing from you again, and maybe we could schedule another appointment for next week.
Great.
Okay. It's great seeing you.
You too.